Awesome. So good evening, everyone. My name is Luis Almonte, and I'm one of the college counselors here at the Berkeley Carroll School. And I'll be serving tonight as the moderator for tonight's program. So just to give you all kind of a heads up, this program is being recorded for families that aren't able to join us tonight. And we will also be sending this recording as well as the presentation out to all of our families that are in attendance tonight. I'd like to start by thanking all of you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedules to join us for tonight's financial aid program. I'm joined by my colleagues, and I would love to take a moment to introduce our wonderful college counseling team. So with us tonight, we have the Director of College Counseling, Carolyn Middleton. We have our Assistant Director of College Counseling, Kalia Williams, and our fabulous Operations Manager, Mary Dunn. So we're very excited to be hosting all of you tonight and supporting you through your respective processes. The program tonight will be recorded, as I mentioned, and we'll be sending this PowerPoint out to all senior and junior family members. The audience tonight consists of seniors, juniors, and any family members that will be assisting them throughout the process or learning more about this process. And although the program tonight will focus mostly on the needs of senior families that are in the thick of this process, I'm confident that all of you will find this information useful as you all begin to understand how this process works. For junior families, I'd like to note that we will be hosting a financial aid event this spring in conjunction with the Brooklyn Independent Schools, as well as a similar event to this next fall when your students are seniors. We'd like to extend a very special thank you to tonight's speaker, Jessica Bernier. Jessica Bernier is the Senior Director of Financial Aid and Methodology at the College Board. She has previous experience in the offices of financial aid at Vassar College, Williams College, Bates College, and Columbia University. She is an expert in this field and has been a wonderful resource throughout recent years at Berkeley Carroll in educating our families about financial aid in a way that is engaging and very easy to digest. Tonight, Jessica's overview will include the following: how to begin to understand how financial aid works, how to apply and when, and what are the important deadlines. And she'll also be providing a great introduction to the terminology that's associated with this process. At the end of the presentation, Jessica will allow some time to answer financial aid questions that the audience might have. But we encourage you to utilize the Q&A chat feature since we are meeting virtually. Typically, I would say in more normal years, this would be in Sterling, and we would have the opportunity to kind of ask questions in different ways and to ask them in a more personal manner. But if you use the Q&A portion, myself and my colleagues will actually be fielding this this feature, and we'll be asking your questions at the end of the presentation. And we'd like the information and Q&A portion of the program to be useful for all of our families. So we're asking all of you to please be mindful to steer clear from family-specific questions or personal circumstances that cannot be answered generally. We want this information to be of use for all of our families and all of our students. If you do have some specific questions, and if tonight after this presentation, it's bringing up some thoughts or questions or some things that you need some insight on, we encourage you to reach out to Jessica Bernier directly. And she'll be sharing her contact information at the end of the PowerPoint, and we'll also be following up with all the families with this information. Other than that, we ask you to give a warm, loud virtual round of applause for Jessica Bernier, and we're very excited for all of you to learn more about this process and this information. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis, and thank you everyone for letting me join you tonight. So bear with me for a moment as I share my presentation. As Louis pointed out, I do work at the College Board and oversee the financial aid methodology. As he pointed out, prior to that, I have worked at quite a few different schools. So I spent well over 20 years in the financial aid office at those schools, reading these financial aid applications and awarding financial aid to students, working with hundreds, probably thousands of families if I actually add it all up, and their different circumstances. So seen pretty much everything, and I'm always happy to answer your questions. And so let's get started on what you need to know about applying for financial aid. So as Lewis mentioned, we're going to concentrate on kind of 4 different areas. One is just the building blocks. What are we trying to do when we talk about awarding financial aid? What programs are available? What's the application process? And then also just forms and resources that you can refer back to in the future. So let's start with the building blocks. A lot of this is going to be familiar to you, especially with your students attending a private school like Berkeley Carroll, is that one, we need to understand what it costs for your student to attend school. So we have both a direct cost, which are the tuition and fees. If the students are living on campus, that would also include room and board. There's the indirect costs. So these are the costs that you're not going to get a bill for, but you know that you have expenses related to that. They're going to have to buy books and supplies. They're going to have personal expenses. And that really, ranges from being able to buy toiletries to, hopefully doing some laundry. So the expenses related to that, being able to go out to dinner with their friends, not every day, but being able to just participate with events and everything on campus. Transportation, they have to get to campus, and they also have to come home at the end of the break or end of the semester. So being able to factor in that transportation, that's going to really vary depending on the school and how far away that school is. It'll also vary based on the academic year of the school. If it's a traditional 2-semester program, you may find that the transportation amount includes 2 round trips for the student every year. And that's the idea, is that they have to get to campus at the beginning of the semester, they go home at the end of the semester, and then they come back for that second semester and need to go home as well. If it's a school that maybe has a tri-semester program, it may be 3 round trips. So really understanding what that transportation amount is. And again, it will vary depending on distance to campus and that academic year. If the student decides to live off campus, this indirect cost, you'll have to account for rent and meal expenses, so that off-campus room and board. So when we step back and combined all of these, that's what we're talking about when we talk about cost of attendance at schools. You'll see also schools may refer to it as the student budget, but really it's that cost of attendance and trying to understand what it's going to cost for that student to attend for those 9 months. So once we figure out how much it's going to cost, we now need to figure out how much the family can pay. And so that's where the expected family contribution comes in. That family contribution, it's really combined of a parent contribution and a student contribution. Most schools are going to expect the student to contribute to their education, and that's going to come in a few different ways. And of course, parents of a dependent student, there's going to be an expectation that parents pay as well. When we look here at the student contribution, that's really thinking about, summer employment, that's thinking about a portion maybe of their savings. And then there's methodology of how we're going to determine what makes up that parent and that student contribution. There's 2 main methodologies out there. There's the federal methodology. That's what's used to determine eligibility for any federal and state financial aid. And then a lot of private schools use what's called institutional methodology. And this is what schools use to determine their own institutional financial aid. What factors into both methodologies is really looking at the family's income, what they have for assets, the family size, the idea being that the income and assets it takes to support a family of 8 is completely different than what it takes to support a family of 4. And so being able to be sensitive to that. The other thing that is factored in is looking at the number in college. The idea is the first step is always to determine what the parents can pay for college. The second step is to look at how many children do they have in college. If it's 1, then that school is going to expect that full parent contribution to go to them. If there's multiple children in college, then they realize they have to split that parent contribution between those multiple colleges. So those are some of the main factors that are looked at. So once we figure out that cost of attendance, we figure out what that family can pay. If there's a difference there, that's where the financial need is. That's the gap between that cost of attendance and that family contribution. And that's where schools are trying to fill in and award financial aid to fill that gap. Not all colleges are able to fill that gap, but many strive to be able to do so. If you're looking at schools that award need-based aid only, that need-based aid cannot be greater than that gap or that financial need. Those that award merit aid, they are able to go beyond that gap. And so you may see that the family contribution and what they have to pay is actually a lot less. And that's really going to vary depending on the school and what their financial aid policies are. So now that we know how the basics work of figuring out that cost of attendance, that family contribution, and filling in that financial need, let's talk about the programs that are used to build those financial aid packages and fill that financial need. So there's a few different components of financial aid. There's a few different sources, there's a few different types and categories. So with the sources, there's money that comes from the federal government. States have their own financial aid programs. Again, if you're looking at private schools and some of the public universities as well, they have their own institutional financial aid programs. And then the last category is private. These are what we think about as like your outside scholarships. If you work for an employer that has a tuition program, then that would be that tuition-based reimbursement. And so that's where those are the different sources. Of course, there's different types. There's gift aid. That's the stuff that you're all here to find out more about. That's the grants and scholarships. And this is the money that does not have to be repaid. There's also self-help. Exactly as it sounds, it's where the student helps themselves pay for college. This comes in the forms of loans. This comes in the form of work study and other part-time employment. And then we have to look at the different categories. I already mentioned need-based and merit aid, but I want to just kind of talk about those for a few more minutes. Need-based aid is when that financial aid is based solely on the financial need of the family. So it's based on the financial circumstances of the family. Non-need-based aid or merit-based aid is based on some merit of the student. It could be an academic related. This is where the athletic financial aid and scholarships come in. This could be based on an extracurricular activity that they participate in. And so that's where the student is getting a financial aid award based on some merit that they bring to the college. So a little bit more about what is part of those different sources. So for the federal government, they offer the Pell Grant. This is a grant program designed for low-income families. For the most part, families that qualify for that usually make under $40,000 to $50,000. There's work study. This is the part-time employment in which the students work on campus and get paid for their hours. Many times you'll see that work study goes to help pay for some of those books and personal expenses. There are loans available to students, and that falls under the Federal Direct Loan Program. So with the Federal Direct Loan Program, there are caps to the amount that the student can borrow each year. So as a first year student, they can borrow up to $5,500. That goes up to $6,500 for sophomores and $7,500 for juniors and seniors. Having said that, there's two different pieces of that federal direct loan. There's a subsidized portion, which means that the government pays the interest while the student is in school. And then there's the unsubsidized portion, which means that the student is responsible for paying for the interest while they're in school. Regardless of whether it's subsidized or unsubsidized, as long as the student is enrolled at least half time, that principal amount of the loan gets deferred. Now, I mentioned there are caps based on the year in school as far as what the students can borrow. Within those caps, there's a cap to the subsidized amount as well. So though the first year student can borrow up to $5,500, the maximum amount that can be subsidized is $3,500. For sophomores, of that $6,500, $4,500 of that can be subsidized. And for juniors and seniors, $7,500 is the maximum they can borrow, but $5,500 is the maximum of the subsidized loan. The last piece you see here is because the federal government doesn't want to leave parents out of it, there is a loan that is available for parents of undergraduate students. This is what's referred to as a PLUS loan. You can borrow up to the cost of education minus any financial aid the student has received. So that is another financing option for families. New York State, it does offer financial aid. They have the tuition assistance or TAP program. This is a need-based award. For any of the New York State funds, they do have to be used at a New York school. So you have to be a New York resident attending a New York school. They also have New York State Merit Awards, and then they have two other programs, the Excelsior Scholarship and the Enhanced Tuition Award, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about those two in a minute. Institutions have their own financial aid programs. So this is scholarships, these are grants. Again, this can be based on need-based awards. They could be merit, it could be a combination of the two. A lot of schools have their own employment programs. It looks very much like the federal work study, where it's part-time employment. The only difference is just the source of funds. I know at all the schools I've worked at, we thought it was important for our students to work on campus and help cover some of those books and personal expenses. We never received enough money from the federal government to employ all of our financial aid students. So the institution would always kick in and created their own institutional employment program. Looked very much like the federal work study program. The only difference was the source of where that money came from. Our students really didn't know the difference. So just want to make you all aware of that. The last thing, though not technically financial aid, many schools do offer a monthly payment plan. So that if you don't want to borrow, but you also don't want to write that big check a couple times a year, you can spread that out over the course of the semester. And then lastly, the private sources, these again are your outside scholarships. These are employer benefit programs. There's also private educational loans. So these are not the PLUS loan from the federal government. This is directly from different banks and lending sources. I always warn families, there are some great private education loans out there. Usually the student is the cosigner as well as the parent. Just one warning is to really just do your due diligence and research on them. Some of them start out with a very low rate, but it is a variable rate. So it will end up increasing and sometimes be as high as a credit card. So just be very careful and again, do your due diligence if this is a route that you're looking at taking to finance their education. So a little bit more about the New York State programs. One is the Excelsior Scholarship. This is available for families with adjusted gross income below $125,000. As I mentioned before, you have to be a resident of New York in order to receive any of the New York State funds. You also have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. The Excelsior Scholarship is meant for students who are attending full-time a SUNY or a CUNY school. In order to qualify, you do have to complete the FAFSA, which we're going to get into and talk about in a few minutes, and the New York State Student Aid Payment Application. What these awards do is they're awarded up to full tuition at a SUNY or CUNY school after you take away any, reduce it by any TAP or Pell Grant gets applied to it first, and then you can receive up to $5,500. The other piece of it is for every year that you receive the Excelsior Scholarship, you must live and work in New York State after graduation. If you don't, then that scholarship turns into a loan. The other piece, because the Excelsior is for SUNY or CUNY schools, there is the Enhanced Tuition Award, which is very similar, but it can be used at private schools. Now, every private school in New York does not necessarily participate in this program. So make sure you see if the school that your student is interested in is a participant in this award. For this, the awards are up to $6,000 minus any TAP aid that they may receive. And again, it has some of the same requirements of completing the FAFSA and the New York State student aid payment application, and you must live and work in New York State after graduation, or it does become a loan. So I've mentioned the FAFSA as far as the application. So let's talk about the application process. First and foremost is the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA. This is what almost every school is going to ask you to complete. This is the form that determines eligibility for any federal and state aid. Some schools use this to determine their own institutional aid. What it does is about 100 questions. It collects some demographic information as well as financial information. And then for the upcoming year, so those of you who are parents of seniors applying for the 22-23 academic year, you can begin filling out the FAFSA on October 1st. So you have a couple weeks before you need to fill it out or start thinking about filling it out. It is available in both English and Spanish. And I have the website here of it's FAFSA.gov in order to complete it. I want to talk a little bit more about what it's asking on the FAFSA. So there is some student information. It's going to ask about the student's legal name. So make sure you put that in and their date of birth, their social security number, their citizenship status. It is going to ask about selective service this year. That is a question on there that's currently that will be going away in the future. There is no longer a need to register for the selective service, but that question still remains because it was too late in the process for it to be taken away for this upcoming year. So I just want to make you all aware of that. And then it's going to ask for some income and asset information. From the parents, it's going to ask about some taxed and untaxed income. It's going to ask about some of your assets. And then, as I mentioned, household size and number in college are very important to understand how those finances or financial information is being used. So it's going to ask about household size and number in college. The other piece is if you file a tax return, you do have the option to import your tax data using what's called the IRS data retrieval tool. Now, I highly encourage families to use this tool. This is going to cut down on the need to provide additional information to schools later on. What this tool does is it allows the FAFSA and the IRS to talk to each other. And so you're giving permission to go out to the IRS database, pull in and request your tax data and put that into the FAFSA. So what happens is you, like I said, you give permission to go out, request that information from the IRS. The IRS authenticates that you are who you are. And if you match their records, then you can at that point choose to transfer that data to the FAFSA application. One warning of note is that you will never be able to see that data. That's to protect your privacy. And so they don't want for scams, and there's been problems. It's usually rare, but every so often there's someone that is able to bring in someone's data and be able to see it. So now they encrypt it so that you can never see that, but that information does get sent to the school. And as I mentioned, this can reduce the documents that are requested by the financial aid office later, because they know that is the data that was on your tax return and sent to the IRS. So that's the FAFSA. As I mentioned, every school is going to expect you to complete that if you're applying for financial aid. This is a form that if you're applying for financial aid every year, you will have to complete it every year. Now, I know many of you your students are probably looking at private schools that award their own institutional aid. There is an additional form that you may have to complete. That's the CSS profile. That is used by close to 400 colleges, universities, and scholarships. It's what many schools use to award their own institutional aid. What I always recommend is check the school's website. I also have listed here on the College Board website, we have listed the schools that accept the CSS profile. And so you can always double check there as far as whether you need to complete that or not. For the 22-23 academic year, again, for you senior parents, you can technically wait until October 1st to complete the CSS profile, but it's actually up and available to complete now. So if you get done with this financial aid program tonight and you're like, yes, I want to start that application, you can, and it is up and available. There is a cost to it. Though the FAFSA is free, there is a cost of the CSS profile. It is $25 for the first college and $16 for each additional college. Having said that, it is free for some families. It is free if you received an SAT fee waiver. It is free for students who are an orphan or ward of the court, and it is free for those that have an adjusted gross income of $100,000 or below. So we want to make sure that our low income and middle income families have the ability to complete that application without the barrier of having to pay for it. So you may be asking yourself, why on earth do I need to fill out 2 applications? And that's really just due to the difference in some of the data that they collect. So with the FAFSA, as far as looking at income, it's really just looking at a couple of pieces of income. It's looking at the adjusted gross income, and it's looking at the parent earnings, which I don't know about you guys. At least the adjusted gross income is based on tax laws. It's a summary of what your income is on a yearly basis, but it doesn't give the details. On the CSS profile, and this is why many schools use this application, is it provides the details. So not only are you completing it and letting schools know what your adjusted gross income and parent earnings are, but you're also saying, where did that money come from? What are the different sources of that income? So thinking about wages, interest and dividends, did it come from different businesses or farms or other taxable areas? So a good example I always like to get, because this was really key for when I was in a school, is we could have 2 families that have the same adjusted gross income. However, there may be one family where most of that income came from unemployment, and the other second family, it came from wages. Though they have their income is the same, because their sources are different, they were in different situations. That family that all of their income came from wages, that's usually an indication that they have recurring income, they have a job, they're pretty stable. That family that has unemployment income, that means there was a job loss. Maybe there's some instability in their income or in their job situation. So that was a family we wanted to reach out to and get more information from, to be able to understand what their situation is. So though on the surface they look the same, once we were able to see the details, we were able to see that they were actually different. And that's what's really important by collecting this additional information on the CSS profile. There's also differences as far as untaxed income that's collected. So both applications ask about what you contribute to a retirement, whether that's in the form of tax deferred pension or other retirement plans, an IRA, SEP or simple, if you receive any child support, getting any untaxed IRA or pension distributions, are you receiving any housing, food, or other living allowances? But then the CSS profile asks for some additional information as far as whether you're receiving any disability benefits. Are you receiving income from outside the country that you may not be taxed on in the US? Are you contributing to flex spending accounts, health savings accounts, social security benefits? And really asking all these questions is just trying to get a full picture of how much income and resources that families have in order to help pay for college, as well as all of their other expenses. There's also a difference in assets that are collected. FAFSA is looking at any cash savings and checking accounts, looking at investments or other real estate equity. It is not looking at home equity. It's not looking at large businesses in which they employ over 100 people. And it's not looking at any farms in which the family lives on. This CSS profile does look at all that information. So it's looking at the cash savings, investments, looking at all businesses in equity, looking at all farms, looking at all other real estate. We know that some families may save in a younger child's name. And so being able to look at that as well. We know that there are tax advantages to saving in a child's name versus as a parental asset. And then we're also looking at the home. That doesn't mean that we expect you to sell your home in order to pay for college, but it is a resource that a renter does not have. And so we want to be able to take a look at that and get that, again, that full financial picture of the family. Now, we've talked about all the incoming sources and the assets that you have. There's also expenses, and we realize that. So on the FAFSA, it does not ask about any expenses. The CSS profile does ask about expenses. So it does ask if you're paying for private school. It'll ask about for your current student that's applying to college of how much you've paid for them for private school. If you have younger children that you're paying private school tuition for, you'll be able to indicate that and say how much that you're paying towards that, both for the current year and for the year in which your college going student will be attending college. Looking at medical and dental expenses, those are really no choices that you have to pay. If you have a medical condition or something happens, you do need to pay for those expenses, and that impacts your ability to pay for college. Same thing, we look at education loans, is how much have you paid? Maybe you're still paying on your own education, or you've had older children that you've financed and are now paying for their education expenses. So being able to collect those expenses and expenses on the application is really important. Having said that, not every school is going to be able to take every expense you have into consideration, but they will take a look at this and be sensitive to it as far as determining your ability to pay for college. So taking a step back and thinking about the application process and what you need to do is know, again, that all schools are going to require you to complete the FAFSA. Some schools are going to expect you to complete the CSS profile. Some may have their own institutional application. So make sure you double check their websites to understand what is required of you. They also may ask for additional information. They may ask for your 2020 income tax returns and W-2s. If you own a business, they may ask for those business tax returns. Not every school may ask for them, but just be aware they may ask for them as well. Now, there are cases where the biological parents may no longer be together. And so trying to understand and navigate this process sometimes a little bit more challenging for these situations. First step in this is really determining who the custodial parent is. That's the parent in which the student lives with the most. I like to think about it as there's 365 days in a year, except for those leap years. That's an odd number. So one parent, even if you have 50-50 joint custody, somebody gets that student for an extra day. If it is truly 50-50 and you split that odd day halfway with the student and each parent, then it's the parent who provides the greater support is considered the custodial parent. The custodial parent is the parent that completes the FAFSA. If the CSS profile is required, they would complete that as well. For the non-custodial parent, they don't have to worry about that FAFSA. They never have to complete it. Some schools do require, if they require the CSS profile for the custodial parent, they may require it for the non-custodial, but not all schools do that. So just be aware of that as well. If you happen to be in a situation where that non-custodial parent is not a part of the student's life, don't be afraid to reach out to schools and know what their process is. Many schools, if they require the CSS profile from the non-custodial parent, they have a waiver process in which you can complete a form, Maybe provide some additional documentation explaining the relationship or lack thereof between the student and that non-custodial parent. So just know that there are ways that if that parent is not part of the student's life, to be able to waive that requirement. These forms ask a lot of questions, but they don't ask everything, or everything that, at least from the financial aid office perspective, that we would like to know. We know that situations change. There are many times where you submit the forms and then something happens a week later, a month later, that you just never could have expected. You want to let the schools know. And what these really are situations that impact your ability to pay for college and that were out of your really control. This could be a change in your marital status, change in employment. You may now have some high medical expenses. Maybe now you have some family care expenses. If you have these while you're completing out the forms, on the CSS profile, there is a place where you can input special circumstances. I'll be honest with you, that when I was reading files was the first section I would read before I would read the rest of the application. I always like to hear what families thought, where their pressure points were, but hear it in their own words. So don't be afraid to share this with schools. They want to take this into consideration. They want to help families, and they want to make sure they get that best financial aid package out to the student the first time. So make sure that, like I said, schools are aware of it. If you did not have an opportunity to include it as part of the application, send the information to the financial aid office. If there's any documentation that you can provide to back up those expenses or change in status, be sure to include that as well. Be specific as well. If you do have high medical expenses or new family care expenses, let the schools know how much. There were many times I would read a file and the families would explain to me their special circumstances, but wouldn't tell me how much they were paying or contributing to these expenses. So I couldn't take it into consideration the first time. And so we would always have to follow up with families later to be able to factor that in. So don't be afraid to share this with the schools and be specific about them. So now that you've gone through the process, the student has been accepted, you've got the financial aid award, what happens now? I always recommend reading that award letter and all the documentation that comes with it a couple times. That first time, it's all overwhelming. You miss stuff, you don't understand it, that's okay. But make sure you take a step back and read through everything so you can understand what it all means. If you have questions, most definitely call that financial aid office and ask them questions. That's what they're there for. They want to answer your questions. They want to make sure you understand everything. But make sure, again, that you've kind of taken that step back and read through everything. Then it's a much more fruitful conversation than that immediate need to pick up the phone and call. So a few things as you're reviewing this information a couple times to really think about and make sure you can answer ahead of time is one is determine what aid is guaranteed for all 4 years. Is it a merit award that's meant to be a 1 year only? Is it meant to be for 4 years? What are the requirements to maintain it? Is it based on a GPA? Is it based on participating in an activity? Is it guaranteed at a certain amount for all 4 years, or does the school guarantee to meet financial need for all 4 years? I know when I was at Vassar, I think that was one of the things that was very scary for families to hear, is that we wouldn't guarantee a dollar amount, but we said we would meet 100% of the financial need for all 4 years. And that's because we wanted to be able to adjust to the family situation. If you lost a job when the student was a sophomore, we wanted to be able to then step in and give you more money. If you won the lottery and didn't need us quite so much, we wanted to be like, hey, we can save some money here. That rarely happened. It was usually more of families that lost their jobs, and we were able to step in and help them. So we were really wanted to make sure that we had that guarantee rather than a specific dollar amount. But really just understand that when you go into it. The other thing is understanding what it does and doesn't cover. Study abroad is a very popular option for juniors. For some schools, their financial aid dollars, their institutional dollars can only be used on campus. So that money can never go to the student if they're studying abroad. Other schools, the student can study wherever they want in the world, and the financial aid will travel with them. So make sure you understand that as well. Also start to figure out, what are you going to be required to pay and how are you going to pay for that? And also think about it over the 4 years. If you're struggling to pay for that first year, how are you going to pay for years 2, 3, and 4? Estimate if you are looking at financing and borrowing both for the student and the parent, is understand what that looks like over 4 years. Some debt is okay, but you want to make sure you keep it at a reasonable amount for everyone. Now, I know you guys are all excited. Senior families, I know you can go and fill out the CSS profile right after this. You still have to wait for the FAFSA. But junior families, if you want to get, well, actually everybody can do this, even the senior families. If you want to get an estimate of what a financial aid award may look like or what you could be expected to pay at a school, every school is required to have a net price calculator on their website. What this allows you to do is input your income and asset information and receive an estimate of your family contribution and financial aid package. I will say it is only as good as the information you put into it. If you forget to put in some income information, it will forget to use it in the calculation. And so just be aware that it really is an estimate. Schools at the end make the final determination of what that family contribution is and what the financial aid package will look like. Schools that offer merit aid, it allows you to see what criteria they may be using for merit aid. Is it based on GPA? Is it based on extracurriculars? Is it based on class rank? And so being able to start to understand what they're looking at when determining their merit aid. So thinking about the application process, there are many steps to it. Just think of it as a family affair. Parents and students should go through the process together. You're both going to need to report information on the applications. Having said that, I know some parents do not feel comfortable sharing their financial information with their students, and that's fine. It's just more of thinking about making sure the student understands the application process and what needs to be done. The other thing is, especially when it comes time to pay, is make sure the student understands how you're going to pay for it. Once they start college, all of the information goes directly to the student. The parents are left in the dark. This is the student's application. This is the student's education, and it's the student that gets all the information. So making sure that the student understands the process and how you're going to pay. That way, if anything comes up and they're contacted by an office on campus, they know whether to reach out to you for help or guidance. And that way it doesn't essentially go to a black hole, which we know happens with students. And that's fine. They're busy with their classes and everything else. They have a lot on their plate. So just making sure they understand that process and what's going to happen. Every college at this point in the application process has their own requirements and their own deadlines. Make sure you know what they are, double check them. For some schools, if you miss the deadline, you miss out on all of their institutional financial aid. For others, the deadlines, it's a suggestion. They would really like it if you would have all the information in there by then, but you're not going to lose out on aid if you miss that deadline. Having said that, any delay you have in getting information to schools delays them in getting a financial aid award to you. So still stick to those deadlines. Depending on the college, they may ask for additional information. They may come back and ask for tax returns. They may ask for some clarifying information that they need to just complete the application process. When in doubt, don't be afraid to contact the financial aid office and ask. If they've asked you for a document a couple of times that you thought you sent, check with them. It may be that maybe a page was missing or something was oh my gosh, I can't even say this word. They couldn't read it. Illegible, sorry. Then, just make sure that, you're able to provide and follow up with any of that documentation. So just the last piece is just forms and resources. We've talked about a lot of different programs and applications tonight. So again, the free application for federal student aid, that's found at fafsa.gov. You can start completing that on October 1st. The CSS profile is found at cssprofile.org. You can start completing that now. New York State and their financial aid programs, they do have more information on their website. And then more information about federal student aid programs can be found on studentaid.gov. And with that, I am happy to answer questions. And again, I'm going to send this copy of this presentation to Lewis so that he can send that out to everybody. So if you have specific questions, and I'm going to stop sharing. If you have specific questions about your financial situation, don't be afraid to reach out to me and I'm happy to answer them. But in the meantime, if you have some general questions, I think we're going to open it up for you.
Thank you, Jessica. That was super informative. So just to kind of remind the audience, if you want to ask any questions, we encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A feature. And then we'll be able to kind of ask that question out loud, and so that way the entire audience can hear the answer as well too. So we'll give you a couple minutes to see what questions you might have, and we'll go from there. So as of right now, we still have no questions in the Q&A, which means you're a pro at your job, Jessica.
Oh no, I already have a question that I know I forgot to answer and cover. So I'm going to ask my own question. How about that?
Perfect.
So one of the questions, and I apologize for not covering this. This is my first financial aid night of the year, so there's always something that gets missed. One question that I often get is when you're thinking about reporting your assets, a lot of families have 529 plans for their children. And so the question is usually, how do I report this on the applications? So a 529 plan is an asset of the owner. So if the parent is the one that set up the 529 plan, it should be reported as an asset of the parent. If it's a grandparent that set it up and the student is a beneficiary, then it's considered a asset of the grandparent. So just kind of be aware of that as far as reporting any 529 plans.
Thanks. So we actually did get some questions that came in the Q&A feature. So the first question that a attendee is asking is, the IRS data retrieval tool, they would like to know how many years does the tool access? So I'm guessing that's saying how far back would it go and pull in that information?
So it asks for just 1 year at a time. So for the 22-23 FAFSA, because it's collecting information about 2020 income tax data, it's only going to go out and pull 2020 income tax data from the IRS. So, and then in the future, when you go to 23-24, it's going to only pull in IRS data from 2021.
Perfect. And the second question we have is, and this, we can answer this and probably tag team it, but What extracurriculars can you get financial aid for? So I can start. Typically, kind of how Jessica made that differentiation between federal and need-based aid versus merit scholarships. Extracurriculars are going to play more into, I would say, specialized things that colleges and universities are looking for that might fit the criteria for a merit scholarship. So it might be something like women in STEM or a community service scholarship. So those are
Right.
going to be school specific that are, I would say, deemed based more case by case on the person's application.
Mhm.
Um, Federal aid and need-based scholarships or aid that's awarded from the school are just going to take into consideration your family's financial situation and the documents that Jessica highlighted earlier. So
Right.
hopefully that kind of makes that distinction between the two. So FAFSA and CSS and school-specific applications are based just on financial need. Merit and I would say scholarships that focus in on activities or specific parts of your application will be merit scholarships case by case by the college or university.
And that's usually based on what's in the admissions application as well for any of the merit. So, but even just think about extracurriculars, I talked about athletics. That's one. Lewis, you mentioned women in STEM. There are also schools that maybe have a great drama program or music program. And so looking for, specific students to meet some of their needs related to those. So every school is going to be different if they offer those and what type of extracurriculars they're looking for.
So we have one more question that came in that says, is it easy to compare different aid packages between schools? So if there's more than one financial aid package that's being offered, how easy is it to kind of navigate those processes and do compare and contrast?
I would say with that, is once you get the financial aid awards letters from those schools, is kind of almost go through it just like we did this presentation today. Is one, understand what they're including in the cost of attendance and making sure it includes everything. Understanding how much financial aid the student is receiving and understanding once you subtract that financial aid from that cost of attendance, how much is left for the family to pay. So really being able to really just compare some of those components line by line to be able to understand and be able to compare it, because you're going to see differences in cost of attendance and really just, and then differences as a result and what those financial aid packages make up. So really just, again, just trying to understand line by line as far as what the cost is, what the financial aid package is, and what the family will be responsible for paying.
And I'd also follow up and say, for families or for students that are unsure of a financial aid package or students who might be going more through the process, I would say in the driver's seat. If you have any questions about your financial aid package or comparing them, you could definitely lean on your counselor to help you understand what they're offering and kind of go through the logistics of the actual award package. So that way you're making the best informed decision and you're understanding it to the T, because sometimes when you're messing with money, you want to make the best possible decision based on the packages that you are awarded. We have a follow-up question to merit scholarships. So somebody asked, are the merit scholarships for extracurriculars within humanities or only STEM and art? So there can be a merit scholarship based on what the school is looking for anything. It's just going to be case by case for each school. We just gave a couple examples of what certain schools might be looking for. Some, I would say, popular ones that I've seen in my career or that I used to look for when I worked in admissions. But those are just examples of what schools are looking for. So it can be a wide range of things. It could be department specific scholarships. It could be humanities, arts, STEM. So I would say that once you start narrowing down your list and you're applying to schools, it never hurts to reach out to the school and ask if they have any specific scholarships or scan their websites to see what it is that you might be able to qualify for or apply for if an application is required.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, as you're looking at schools, is look at both the admissions website and what they may list there. Also look at the financial aid websites as well, as far as if there's any specific programs that they have for any extracurriculars or areas of study.
Yeah, and they'll have a criteria of what most schools will have a criteria of what merit scholarships and the admission are looking for. So in terms of talent, in terms of academics, if there's anything that they are specifically targeting, they will vocalize that. And admissions representatives are pretty transparent about what that might look like in terms of numbers or in terms of special criteria.
Right.
We have time for maybe one more question. If one doesn't come through, then we'll wrap up. But as of right now, the Q&A feature is empty. So doesn't look like anything's coming in. So I want to thank Jessica. Thank you so much for coming today to speak with our families. I'm sure that we're going to have a number of family members or students that might be reaching out to you. So I also want to thank you for being so gracious to allow students and their families to use you as a resource. Just to reiterate to all of our family members or anybody who might be watching the recording of this, we will be sending this information to all of you. You're watching it now. Please go through the information, contact Jessica if you have any questions. And if there's anything that your counselors can help you with or help you understand that you might have been a little hazy for you, or maybe you need a little bit more context on, feel free to reach out and schedule an appointment with your counselor.
And thank you everyone for having me tonight. I was happy to share this information with you.
Absolutely. I'll be sending a follow-up email this week with the presentation as well as this recording and the contact information. But other than that, we want to say thank you so much for everyone to attending, and we hope that you have a wonderful night.
Thank you again.